And then they say he left troops in Syria. You know what I did? I left troops to take the oil. I took the oil. The only troops I have are taking the oil. Venezuela. How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. Excuse me, I didn't. I'm the one that gave Ukraine offensive weapons and tank killers. Obama didn't. You know what he sent? He sent pillows and blankets.
I am going to be talking about Donald Trump and the fact of the matter that Donald Trump is not a so-called threat to the deep state. He's not a threat to the elites. Donald Trump is himself a billionaire elite who is funded by many prominent billionaires on Wall Street, as I'll be speaking about today. And when Donald Trump was president, his foreign policy was very similar to the foreign policy of the Republican and Democratic presidents who came before him. He continued supporting wars around the world, backing coups and regime change operations, imposing sanctions on foreign countries. Donald Trump personally ordered assassinations of foreign politicians, which is quite ironic today. And the simple fact is there were many, many more similarities than there were differences in the very hawkish, belligerent foreign policy of Donald Trump as there were with the foreign policy of Obama and George Bush and Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan and Joe Biden. The fact of the matter is that for decades, every single US president has been a war criminal who has waged war around the world, tried to overthrow foreign governments. Donald Trump is no exception to that. However, many of Trump's supporters are claiming that he was targeted because he is an enemy of the deep state and that there was a deep state attempt to assassinate him on July 13th at a rally in Pennsylvania in which a shooter allegedly tried to kill Donald Trump. Now, this story is very, very strange. The shooter was identified. He was killed on the day of the attack. He was a 20-year-old named Thomas Matthew Crooks. And the irony is he was actually registered as a Republican. He was a proud, patriotic, conservative American. He was very young. He graduated from a high school in Pennsylvania in 2022. And in his final graduation photo, he wore a t-shirt with the US flag on it. And local media outlets reported they interviewed his classmates who said that he had conservative political leanings. And the majority of his classmates were liberals, but he, no matter what, always stood his ground on the conservative side. So this story is very strange. A 20-year-old Republican conservative. Now, some of Trump's supporters are claiming that the left tried to kill him because this shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks, when he was 17 years old, a teenager, in 2021, he made one donation of $15 to a political action committee, a PAC that is supposedly progressive, called the Progressive Turnout Project. But in reality, this is not actually a progressive PAC. It's actually a spam operation. They get access to your email, and you've probably seen this stuff in your spam folder. And they just send you hundreds and hundreds of spam messages with polls saying, should President Joe Biden pardon Donald Trump? And they often try to confuse people into donating to them, thinking that a bill is overdue or they have to do something for their taxes. So they mislead people. So it's not surprising that a 17-year-old kid made a $15 donation. It doesn't mean that he was a left-winger, not in any way. So there is no evidence whatsoever that this 20-year-old shooter was part of the US deep state. He did not work in the past for an intelligence agency or a police force. We have no idea why he did this. I'm not here to speculate. What I do want to talk about today is how Donald Trump is not in any way a threat to the US deep state. On the contrary, if you look at Donald Trump's foreign policy when he was president and the foreign policy that he has promoted since leaving office as he campaigns for president again, you can see very clearly that he is in agreement with the vast majority of the U.S. foreign policy establishment in Washington in supporting war, in supporting empire, in supporting sanctions, in supporting regime change. As I'll be showing today in depth with concrete evidence and sources, when Donald Trump was president, he killed Iran's top general in an act of war against Iran. He also killed a top Iraqi military official, and the Iraqi government ordered Trump to withdraw the U.S. troops occupying Iraq. He refused to withdraw them, so he maintained the illegal U.S. occupation of Iraq. He also maintained the illegal U.S. military occupation of Syria and boasted that he was stealing Syria's oil.
And then they say he left troops in Syria. You know what I did? I left troops to take the oil. I took the oil. The only troops I have are taking the oil. They're protecting the oil. I took over.
We're taking the oil. We're not taking
well,
the oil.
Maybe we will. Maybe we won't.
They're protecting the facility.
I don't know. Maybe we should take it. But we have the oil. Right now, the United States has the oil. So they say he left troops in Syria. No, I got rid of all of them other than we're protecting the oil. We have the oil.
Furthermore, he launched a coup attempt and a failed invasion of Venezuela. He massively expanded the sanctions on Cuba and called for overthrowing Cuba's government. He backed a violent coup attempt against Nicaragua's leftist government. He backed a successful coup against Bolivia's left-wing government. He continued the war in Afghanistan, refusing to withdraw troops. He expanded the war on Yemen, refusing to end the war in Yemen. And as his top foreign policy officials, Donald Trump appointed key parts of the U.S. deep state. Donald Trump's first Secretary of State was Rex Tillerson, who was a CEO of ExxonMobil, the oil corporation. His subsequent Secretary of State was the former CIA director, Mike Pompeo, a hardcore neoconservative.
What's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
The CIA is the king of the deep state. Well, Donald Trump put the deep state in charge of the State Department. Quite literally, the CIA ran Donald Trump's State Department. Furthermore, Donald Trump appointed as his national security advisor John Bolton, the arch neoconservative who was in the George Bush administration. He was an architect of the Iraq War. He has never seen a war that he did not love. And he helped carry out these warmongering policies under Donald Trump because the reality is that Trump simply brought back many of the neoconservatives from the George Bush administration and from the Ronald Reagan administration. Trump also brought back war criminals like Elliot Abrams, who oversaw his coup attempt in Venezuela. Elliot Abrams was one of the masterminds behind the Iran-Contra scandal in the Ronald Reagan administration in the 1980s. So all you have to do is look at the people who were running Donald Trump's foreign policy. They were literally part of the deep state. The deep state was running Donald Trump's foreign policy. He voluntarily appointed them. No one told him that he had to appoint these neoconservative war hawks as his top foreign policy officials. Trump voluntarily did that. Furthermore, as I'll be showing today, Donald Trump sent Ukraine weapons that even Obama had refused to send Ukraine. Trump tore up 2 different arms treaties with Russia, threatening war on Russia, and Donald Trump started the trade war on China and the new Cold War on China that Biden has continued. These are all bipartisan policies. But first, what I'm going to start with today is Israel, because Israel continues to carry out horrific crimes against humanity in Gaza, bombing Gaza with billions of dollars of U.S. military support. Of course, Joe Biden, the Democratic U.S. president, is providing those bombs being used to kill children and women and elderly people and other civilians in Gaza. But Donald Trump and the Republican Party staunchly support those policies. And in fact, Donald Trump himself proudly said in 2024 in March, he said that he boasted that he was, quote, the best president in the history of Israel. Furthermore, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported on pro-Israel fundraisers that are happening in support of Trump. And in these pro-Israel fundraisers, they are proudly referring to Trump as, quote, the most pro-Israel president in history. They're raising money for Donald Trump's campaign, pro-Israel groups boasting that he is the most pro-Israel president. The Israeli apartheid regime itself agrees with that. Back when Trump was president, the far-right leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, created a settlement in the illegally occupied Golan Heights, which is Syrian sovereign territory that Israel has been illegally occupying for decades, according to international law. Well, Netanyahu went to this illegally occupied Syrian territory to open a new settlement that is called Trump Heights. It is named after Donald Trump in honor of Trump's staunch support for Israel. And of course, Trump moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is also occupied according to international law. Almost no other country on earth has done that. Only the U.S. and a few colonies and proxy regimes. And yet Donald Trump did that and boasted of doing that in support of Israel. The irony is that the Democratic president, Joe Biden, is also as pro-Israel as it gets. He's sending billions of dollars of weapons to Israel as it's bombing children. And Trump wants to send even more weapons. In fact, in the disastrous debate in which Biden couldn't even tell you where he was, what the hour was, what his name was. I mean, Biden is so clearly in extreme cognitive decline. But in that debate, Trump was criticizing Biden for supposedly not being pro-Israel enough. And as an insult, Trump referred to Biden as a Palestinian. That is how much he has dehumanized Palestinians, the indigenous peoples of Palestine who are being ethnically cleansed and bombed by Israel with U.S. weapons. Trump hates Palestinians so much that he uses the word Palestinian as an insult.
Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one who wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
But we're only scratching the surface here. There is so much to get into. As Donald Trump is campaigning for president, at a fundraiser, he actually threatened to bomb China and Russia. Now, Democrats spent years spreading this ridiculous conspiracy theory claiming that Donald Trump was a Putin puppet and that supposedly Russia had meddled in the US election to get Trump elected. This ridiculous Russiagate conspiracy. In reality, it was the exact opposite. Donald Trump and the neocons that he appointed to run his foreign policy, they are just as responsible as Obama and Biden for the war in Ukraine, which is a NATO proxy war against Russia. Trump helped to set this up. In 2019, Trump boasted in a White House statement that he was withdrawing the U.S. from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, and Trump personally claimed that supposedly Russia had not honored the agreement. This put the U.S. one step closer, a giant step closer, to war with Russia. Then, a year later, Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from another Cold War era arms treaty with Russia, which had previously been signed with the Soviet Union, which is the Open Skies Treaty. So Donald Trump and the neocons he appointed, they were tearing up all of the arms deals with Russia, which made war, a proxy war with Russia, significantly more likely. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, Trump sent lethal weapons to Ukraine that even Obama had refused to send. And Obama bears responsibility for backing the 2014 coup in Ukraine that overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected government and set off this proxy war in the first place. Obama started it. Trump expanded it, and Biden has expanded it. It's bipartisan. I'm reading here a newswire from ABC News in 2019. Trump admin approves new sale of anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. It adds, the Trump administration first approved the sale of Javelin missiles to Ukraine in 2017. The irony is that in 2022, with the war in Ukraine in full swing, Trump boasted that he provided Ukraine the weapons that it was using, quote, so well in order to fight Russia. He boasted of arming Ukraine to attack and kill Russian soldiers. So the idea that he was a Russian puppet is so ridiculously absurd. He set the stage for the Ukraine war just as much as Obama. So the whole Russiagate narrative was ridiculous on so many grounds. Another example was NATO. Biden has said, I'm the best president for unifying NATO and strengthening NATO. Of course, NATO is not a defensive alliance. NATO is a warmongering alliance that destroyed Yugoslavia in the 1990s. It no longer exists as a country. NATO destroyed Libya, overthrowing the Libyan government in a 2011 war of aggression, killing Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Libya had the highest living standards in all of Africa. It's been a failed state for over a decade. NATO brought open-air slavery back to Libya, and there are open-air slave markets in Libya now, and Biden is so proud of that. Well, Trump also bears responsibility for strengthening NATO as well, this warmongering alliance. When Trump was president, he called on NATO members to double their military spending from 2% of GDP to 4% of GDP. Trump was very proud of this. He said that everyone must expand their military spending in NATO because he was preparing for a war on China. Trump's top advisor, Steve Bannon, who was the CEO of Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, he said this openly in a conference. Steve Bannon boasted, quote, "We're at war with China." He said it, we're at war with China. And he claimed that the US is supposedly winning that war. Trump was not a so-called pro-Russian leader. On the contrary, he was arming Ukraine to fight against Russia in a proxy war. Instead, Trump's strategy and Steve Bannon's strategy was to try to soften the tensions with Russia in order to weaken the friendship between Russia and China, because Trump wanted to isolate China to wage war on China. And it's not just Trump. There are many people in Washington who have called for this strategy, including the late war criminal Henry Kissinger, who had been an advisor to every single US president for decades, including Trump. He advised Trump. And Kissinger had told Trump that Trump should work with Russia to box in China. That was the strategy. And ironically, the liberal conspiracy theory, this obsession with Russiagate, ironically, that actually sabotaged this attempt by the Trump administration to reduce tensions with Moscow in order to wage war on Beijing. So now we see today that China and Russia are very close friends, very close partners, and this US strategy is going to fail. But this is exactly what the Nixon administration did, which was quite similar to the Trump administration in many ways. And Kissinger, of course, oversaw Nixon's foreign policy, and it was referred to as Kissingerian triangular diplomacy, and they wanted to try to do the same, to wage war on China. This was very, very clear under Trump. He's the one who started the trade war on China that Biden has only continued. It's, of course, bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, but it was the Trump administration that started it. Mainstream media outlets like the Financial Times referred to Trump's aggressive policies against China back in 2020 as a new Cold War. And we now see today this new Cold War is completely bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats are supporting every single effort by the Biden administration to escalate this new Cold War against China. And Trump wants to take it even further. Biden has put tariffs on important Chinese technologies like electric vehicles, semiconductors, solar panels. He has restricted the export of advanced semiconductors and quantum computing parts and AI technology to China. And Trump wants to go even further. Trump has called for imposing blanket tariffs of at least 60%, if not more, on all Chinese products. All. This is an extreme economic war that is like massively accelerating the trade war that Trump started in his first term up to level 11. I mean, this is extreme, and it would cause very high inflation in the United States, given how much the US economy relies on importing products from China and how China plays a key role in global supply chains. Trump's national security advisor after John Bolton was another extreme anti-China war hawk named Robert O'Brien. And he published an article in June in which he called for basically war on China. He said that if Trump returns to the White House, the Trump administration is considering severing all economic ties with China, deploying the entire US Marine Corps to Asia, and resuming live nuclear weapons testing to threaten China. This is what the US deep state wants above all, war on China. And Donald Trump wants to deliver it to them on a silver platter. He is not in any way a threat to the so-called deep state. Not in any way. Donald Trump simply wants war on China, and he wants to reduce tensions with Russia and try to break the friendship between Russia and China to focus on isolating China. He disagrees with some Democrats who want war on both Russia and China. The difference is that Democrats want war on Russia now and China in the medium to the long term, whereas Trump and the Republicans, they want to pause tensions, pause relations with Russia, and instead they want war on China in the short term. But both political parties are full of warmongering imperialists and neocolonialists. Biden and Trump are both horrific war criminals. On that note, I'm going to conclude here. I'm Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I will see you next time.